The room went silent the moment Victoria Hale lowered herself into the chair that had belonged to the woman of the house for 22 years. She did it casually, almost confidently, as if she had every right to be there. The crystal glasses stopped clinking. Forks hovered above expensive plates. Even the soft piano music seemed to fade into the background. At the head of the table, 78-year-old Margaret Whitmore stared at her, her silver hair perfectly pinned and her trembling hand gripping the edge of the table. Then Margaret slammed her palm against the polished wood and shouted so loudly that everyone in the mansion froze. "Get up!" Victoria's face went pale. But the real shock was not that Grandma had defended her granddaughter-in-law. It was that everyone at the table knew exactly why that chair mattered. It was the chair where Sarah had sat every Sunday night, even when she was exhausted, even when she was sick, even when nobody thanked her for everything she did for the family. And now the woman who had helped destroy Sarah's marriage had dared to take her place. If you believe that kindness, loyalty, and second chances still matter, take a moment to like this video, leave a comment, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the person who looks weakest in the room is actually the one holding everything together, and sometimes justice arrives from the most unexpected voice. The story began 3 months earlier in a beautiful suburb outside Charleston, South Carolina, where the Whitmore family lived in an enormous white mansion surrounded by oak trees, flower gardens, and a long stone driveway. To outsiders, the Whitmores looked perfect. Richard Whitmore was a successful real estate developer whose company had built luxury communities across the Southeast. His wife, Sarah, was elegant but never interested in showing off. She preferred quiet mornings, gardening, cooking for the family, and volunteering at a local community center. Their 2 children, Nathan and Clara, had grown up believing that home was supposed to be a place where people felt safe. But somewhere along the way, Richard had forgotten that lesson. For 22 years, Sarah had been the woman who remembered everyone's birthdays, attended every school event, cared for Richard's elderly mother, and stayed beside him during the difficult years when his company nearly collapsed. She had sold her own jewelry once to help him make payroll. She had never told anyone. She simply believed that marriage meant standing beside someone when the world turned against them. But success changed Richard. Slowly, his meetings became longer. His phone was always face down. He began coming home late with excuses that sounded rehearsed. Sarah noticed the distance, but kept hoping it was temporary. Then Victoria entered his life. Victoria Grant was younger, beautiful, ambitious, and fascinated by Richard's wealth and influence. She worked as a consultant for one of his development projects, and what began as professional meetings became secret dinners, private messages, and eventually an affair. Sarah did not discover the truth through a confession. She discovered it because one rainy evening, Richard left his phone on the kitchen counter, and a message appeared that was impossible to misunderstand. Sarah stood there for several minutes staring at the screen. Her hands shook, but she did not scream. She did not throw the phone. She simply walked upstairs, closed the bedroom door, and sat on the edge of the bed where she and Richard had once dreamed about growing old together. She cried silently until morning. The next day, Richard admitted everything. He promised that the affair was over. He promised that Victoria meant nothing. He begged Sarah not to tell the children. But Sarah soon realized that the lies had not stopped. Victoria was still calling. Richard was still meeting her. And worse, Richard had begun telling people that Sarah was unstable and difficult. When Sarah finally confronted him, Richard gave her an ultimatum that broke something inside her. He said he wanted a divorce and claimed that he had fallen in love with Victoria. He told Sarah that she deserved someone better, as if 22 years of marriage could be erased with one sentence. Sarah left the mansion with 2 suitcases. She moved into a modest little house near the Charleston Community Center where she volunteered. The house was nothing like the mansion. The kitchen was small. The floors creaked. There was no expensive artwork or marble staircase. Yet for the first time in months, Sarah could breathe. What Richard did not expect was that Sarah would not fight him for money. She asked only for what was legally hers and refused to humiliate him publicly. She told Nathan and Clara that their father had made choices they would have to understand for themselves. She never asked them to choose sides. That decision changed everything. Nathan, Richard's 31-year-old son, was furious with his father. Clara was heartbroken. But the person most devastated by Richard's betrayal was his mother, Margaret. Margaret had never liked Victoria. She had met her twice and immediately sensed that Victoria was more interested in the Whitmore name than in Richard himself. But Richard was stubborn. He insisted that his mother was simply refusing to accept that his marriage was over. Then came the night of the family dinner. Richard had invited everyone to the mansion to celebrate the completion of his company's biggest development project. Victoria arrived wearing an elegant emerald dress and carrying an expensive handbag. Richard introduced her as the woman he intended to marry. Sarah was not invited, but Margaret had secretly invited her. Sarah almost refused to come. She had no desire to sit at the same table with the man who had broken her heart and the woman who had helped him do it. But Margaret had called her personally and begged her to attend, saying that there were things the family needed to face. When Sarah arrived, the room became uncomfortable. Richard looked embarrassed. Victoria looked irritated. Nathan and Clara immediately went to their mother and hugged her. Then Margaret pointed toward the chair beside her. It was Sarah's old seat, the chair where Sarah had sat for 22 years. Sarah hesitated before sitting down. Dinner began awkwardly. Nobody touched the conversation at first. Richard kept trying to discuss business. Victoria laughed too loudly at his jokes. Sarah quietly ate her food, determined not to let anyone see how deeply the evening hurt. Then Victoria stood up. She walked around the table, smiled at Margaret, and said she wanted to sit closer to Richard because they were going to be married soon. Without asking permission, she pulled out Sarah's chair and sat down in it. Sarah's face changed. It was not anger. It was pain. For Victoria, it was only a chair. For Sarah, it was 22 years of memories. It was where she had helped Nathan with his homework, where she had held Clara's hand after her first heartbreak, where she had sat beside Margaret during family illnesses, where she had listened to Richard talk about his dreams before he became too busy to remember them. Victoria crossed her legs and smiled as though she had won something. That was when Margaret stood. The elderly woman looked at Victoria with a fury nobody at the table had ever seen. "Get up." Victoria froze. Margaret pointed directly at her. "That chair is not yours." Nobody moved. Victoria tried to laugh it off, but Margaret continued. She told Victoria that she could have expensive clothes, a beautiful car, and even Richard if he was foolish enough to give himself away, but she could never inherit the place Sarah had earned through 22 years of sacrifice. Richard tried to calm his mother, but Margaret turned on him next. She reminded him of the night his business nearly failed, and Sarah stayed awake until sunrise helping him organize paperwork. She reminded him of the time he was hospitalized, and Sarah slept in a chair beside his bed for 9 nights. She reminded him that when his father died, Sarah was the one who held the entire family together. Then Margaret revealed something nobody knew. Years earlier, Richard's father had placed a trust fund in Margaret's name, but Margaret had the legal authority to distribute it among her children and grandchildren. She had always planned to leave Richard a substantial portion of it. But after discovering what he had done to Sarah, she had changed her will. She would no longer reward betrayal. Richard stared at his mother in disbelief. Margaret calmly explained that money was not the point. The point was character. A person who threw away a loyal spouse for someone who made them feel important could not expect loyalty in return. Victoria suddenly realized that the future she had imagined was disappearing before her eyes. She accused Margaret of humiliating her. Margaret answered that humiliation was what Victoria had helped bring into Sarah's life, and she would not allow Sarah to be humiliated again under her own roof. Victoria stood and stormed out. Richard remained seated, staring at the empty chair. Then something unexpected happened. Nathan stood beside his mother. He told Richard that he could forgive him someday, but forgiveness would require honesty. Clara joined him and said that their mother had spent years teaching them that family meant showing up when things became difficult. Richard had shown up only when life was convenient. Richard looked at Sarah. For the first time, he seemed to understand what he had lost. But Sarah did not immediately forgive him. She simply told him that she hoped one day he would become the man she once believed he was. That night, Sarah left the mansion with Margaret. The two women drove through Charleston beneath a sky full of stars. Margaret apologized for not seeing Richard's unhappiness sooner. Sarah squeezed her hand and told her that she did not need to apologize. Over the following months, Sarah rebuilt her life. She expanded her work at the community center and started a small program that provided meals for elderly people living alone. The program grew quickly. Local businesses donated food. Volunteers arrived every weekend. Eventually, Sarah turned an unused building into a community kitchen. Nathan helped with the finances. Clara managed the volunteers. And Margaret became Sarah's loudest supporter. Meanwhile, Richard's relationship with Victoria collapsed. Without the excitement of secrecy, Victoria became dissatisfied. She wanted luxury, influence, and constant attention. Richard finally realized that he had mistaken excitement for love. He tried to win Sarah back. He sent flowers. Sarah returned them. He wrote letters. Sarah read them but did not answer. He offered to buy her a new house. She refused. Finally, one winter morning, Richard appeared at the community center carrying nothing but a simple box of old photographs. He told Sarah that he did not expect her to take him back. He only wanted her to know that he was sorry. Sarah opened the box. Inside were photographs from their wedding, Nathan's first birthday, Clara's first day of school, family vacations, and ordinary Sunday dinners. At the bottom was a photograph of Sarah sitting in that same dining room chair 20 years earlier, laughing while Margaret watched her from across the table. Sarah began to cry, not because she wanted Richard back, but because she realized that despite everything, those memories had still been real. She told Richard that she could forgive him, but forgiveness did not mean returning to the past. Richard nodded. He finally understood. Months later, Sarah's community kitchen held its grand opening. Hundreds of people attended. Elderly residents received warm meals. Children brought flowers. Volunteers filled the room with laughter. Margaret stood beside Sarah and watched proudly. Then Richard arrived. He did not ask for another chance. He simply walked toward Sarah and handed her an envelope. Inside was the deed to a large building Richard owned. He had donated it to the community kitchen. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. Richard told her that for years he had believed success meant owning more. He finally understood that real success meant leaving something behind that helped other people. Sarah smiled through her tears. She did not know what the future held, but she knew she was no longer the woman who had walked out of that mansion carrying 2 suitcases and a broken heart. She had built something stronger than the life she lost. And somewhere in Charleston, behind the doors of an elegant mansion, a once powerful man finally understood that a seat at a table is never truly about wood, leather, or where someone sits. It is about what they have given to the people around them. And Sarah had earned her place long before anyone realized how valuable it was. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that betrayal does not have to be the end of your story, and subscribe for more stories about courage, kindness, forgiveness, and second chances. And before we reach the final line, I want you to leave one special comment. I will never give up on my worth. Because sometimes life takes away the person, the house, the marriage, or the dream you thought you could never live without. But losing something does not mean losing yourself. Sarah lost her husband, but she found her strength. She lost her mansion, but she found her purpose. She lost the life she thought she wanted, but she built a life that countless people needed. And that night, when Grandma shouted, "Get up!" she wasn't protecting a chair. She was protecting a lifetime of sacrifice. She was reminding everyone at that table that some places cannot be stolen simply by sitting in them. Because the seat Sarah had earned was never really at the dining table. It was in the hearts of the people who finally understood her worth.